Welcome to the Negotiation Made Simple podcast, where we help you master the art of negotiation and win the next deal. I'm your host, John Lowry. I'm excited about this episode where we are going to learn how to ask for what you want and then how to get it. And the way that we're going to learn is how is it that we manage our vibe. And here with us to talk about that is Heather Hansen. Heather is a good friend of mine. We've done lots of work together over the past couple of years. She spent over 20 years defending healthcare providers in medical malpractice cases, spent a lot of time in the courtroom, and has since transitioned her career and is now a communication consultant, a keynote speaker, and host of the Elegant Warrior podcast. She's also the author of 2 books, The Elegant Warrior and Advocate to Win. And Heather has done an amazing job in terms of helping people in high pressure, very tense situations learn how to communicate effectively and how to present themselves well so that they can be effective and they can be influential and they can achieve what they're looking to achieve. She's got a lot of great ideas for us that will help us regardless of whether we're negotiating a new sales deal, whether it is we're trying to solve a problem with an employee or we're putting a lawsuit to rest. Let's jump into this conversation with Heather Hansen. Hey everybody, I want to start this episode with a story. I was in a mediation a couple of weeks ago, and there was a very specific moment at the beginning of this mediation that literally set the tone for the entire day. And I'm so glad that I picked up on this moment because this tiny little thing in terms of how the mediator communicated, it made all the difference in the world in terms of how we were able to work together that day, how we were able to trust each other enough, having just met each other, to do business and get a deal done. And I'm really excited today to have Heather Hansen here to talk with us about some of these dynamics I saw. Here's what happened. It was really interesting. The mediator walked in and we were getting ready to kind of go through our case. We were getting ready to kind of lay it out for the mediator. And the mediator walked in and said, listen, I've heard the plaintiff's case. And he says, he's like, I would guess that you have a whole lot to share with me that's going to counter what they have to say. And we could spend the next hour or so doing that, or we could just have a conversation about how we're going to get something done today. And there he gave a little signal about what he wanted to focus on. But then he also, just through that kind of communication, set the tone in terms of how we were not going to spend the day fighting back and forth, but how we were going to spend the day working toward a resolution. And this is what Heather does, is help people in adversarial context think about how is it that they can work sometimes with adversaries, sometimes with folks kind of on their side, to work towards accomplishing what they want to accomplish within the midst of the fight or within the midst of putting the deal together. And so, Heather, we are thrilled to have you on the Negotiation Made Simple podcast to really kind of think about these things and how it is that we can get what we want in life.
I love it. I love that story. What a good mediator. And I'm happy to be here, John. I love the podcast.
Good deal. Well, I think the first thing to do, Heather, is give people a sense of kind of what you do and help people understand like some of the work you do. And then we'll jump into some conversations. I'm excited to get after it.
I think the best way to describe what I do is I help people have difficult conversations. I often say that I help people to ask for what they want and get it in those difficult conversations. I was a trial attorney for 20-something years, defending medical malpractice cases. And from there, I got trained to be a mediator and I got 2 certifications in that. I also was an anchor at the Law and Crime Network, and I spent a couple of years doing television stuff. I wrote a book. I got certified as a coach. I'm even certified in hypnosis because I wanted to study the subconscious brain. But always it came back down to communication. It came back down to how do you get what you want from each other? A lot of times when you seem like you're so far apart, in the courtroom especially, it's a little bit different because there's a winner and a loser in the courtroom. But most of our cases settle. And so you've got to go from these very aggressive opposite sides to come to some sort of an agreement. And you can't do that without communication. And that's what I teach.
And so let's pick up right there, because I think one of the things that you do is I think about your world and as I think about, the world that I live in terms of helping people negotiate, is the commonality between that is we spend a lot of time helping people prepare for difficult conversations. These conversations are not ones that people are eager to jump into. Sometimes they're fraught with peril, they're fraught with uncertainty. There's the concern that, they could become kind of hostile. But then a lot of folks, there's a lot riding on these conversations. And so they're very concerned that they're going to make a mistake or do something to kind of throw it off. And so they don't get the deal. And so tell us a little bit about, what is preparing a witness or what is preparing somebody in your context? How is that crossover to the work that needs to be done to prepare someone for a difficult conversation and negotiation?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to sort of recognize that the idea of difficult or hard conversations is just an opinion. In my work, I talk about the bear technique, and it's part of my thought leadership. That is, the B of the bear is belief. The E is energy or emotion. The A is action, and the R is result. And most of the time when we go through this bear technique, and I'll talk you through it right now, the belief and the result are very similar. So, for example, if I'm going into a negotiation for a job or in a case, or I want to get on a board and I'm negotiating with someone, and my belief is this is going to be a difficult conversation, my energy is going to be apprehensive. It might be aggressive. It might be anxious, right? That's going to be my emotion and my energy. My action then is going to be maybe a little bit more attacking, maybe a little bit more stuttering, maybe a little bit more timid, depending on my personality. And the result is it's a difficult conversation. The belief and the result almost always match up. So one of the first things I do when I'm preparing someone for a difficult conversation is we work on the belief. Can we believe something different? Can we believe that this conversation is going to be interesting? Can we believe that it's going to be fruitful? Can we believe that it's going to be a learning opportunity? And I never want to gaslight people. One of the things I'm known for is telling people that advocating is asking for what you want out loud and with delight. But you're not going to believe that this is delightful if you don't believe it's delightful. So I'm not going to try and make you believe something you don't believe. But what we do is try to find something that you can believe that also creates a better energy and emotion than anxiety or fear or aggression. Sometimes, John, often what I find is I'm a good teacher in our situations, right? If I'm preparing a witness to testify and they believe this is going to be so hard, this is going to be so terrible, I'm prey, instead of focusing on I'm a bad witness, if they think of themselves as a good teacher, then they can believe they're a good teacher. And then as the result, they're a good teacher. So if you can go into these conversations, everyone listening, instead of resting in that belief that this is a difficult conversation, find a way to believe it's going to be interesting. I'm going to learn something. It's going to be a nice challenge. When it's over, I'll have evidence that I am good at something. Anything that you can believe, then it's going to change the entire day, the entire negotiation.
Yeah, I think that kind of that mindset that you bring is so critical. I mean, the story I told at the top about this mediator, one of the things that was interesting is how incredibly positive he was. And he was just like, we'll get it worked out. Let me go to work. I'll be back. And he just kind of had this energetic, positive kind of vibe to him as he was doing these things. And that's so true as well in terms of business, to where as a manager, everyone else sees this as, whatever the problem is you got to solve, but they see it as a threat. They see it as a frustration. And to be the one that comes in and says, we got a challenge, but we can get through this. We're all smart people, good people trying to do the right thing. Like, let's go to work and figure it out. Just that attitude right there can put things on a path that can be so much more productive.
100%. The story that you told at the start, that mediator came in and shifted your belief. You were initially believing, okay, this is our time to fight back to whatever the plaintiff the other side just told this mediator. And the mediator came in and gave you a new belief, a new thing you could believe. This could be an opportunity to come to an agreement. And now and he had I talk about that energy, right? He had the energy of his belief behind him. And so you started to believe, and then that does shift everything because now you guys are believing, oh, this is actually possible. And when you believe it's possible, your energy is less aggressive. It's less adversarial. Your actions are going to be maybe a little bit more compromising on both sides. And then the result is it's possible. So that bear technique, I find before we start talking about what to say and how to say it, we talk about your beliefs. Because the other piece of this, and you just talked about his vibe, there's a study out of Yale that says that you learn more about a person's emotions from their tone of voice than their body language and their facial expressions combined. And also, you can't fake your tone of voice. So you've got to get into a belief that is reflected in your tone of voice that isn't going to come across angry, afraid, whatever, and it's going to come across as something a little bit more compelling to the people you're talking to.
Yeah. Really interesting stuff. So one of the things that I hear you saying is, in your tone, in your mindset, in your belief, all these kinds of things, what it is that you're trying to do is you're trying to influence kind of the beliefs in the minds of the people that you're communicating with or in the hearts of the people that you're communicating with. And so talk to us a little bit more practically in terms of how do you do that? Like, how do you help people with the inner negotiation that they're working through and deciding how to respond to your move or what positions they're going to take in the process?
Yeah, so building a belief was my job in the courtroom for 25 years. And so the way that we do it is I like acronyms, right? So this is the C technique: stories, evidence, and the energy of your body. So stories, I know that you are a huge fan of stories, John. We actually were together at a conference that was all about stories. But the human brain likes stories. The human brain also remembers stories. Stories tend to be emotional. So when you're trying to build a belief, whether it's your own belief before you go into the negotiation or someone else's belief when you're in the room, you want to use stories that will resonate with that person, stories that are emotional, that are relevant. And then we don't talk a lot about this in the world of stories, but it's really important in the courtroom and outside of the courtroom. And that's evidence. There's a difference between facts and evidence. This is a quote, it's not my quote, but it's anonymous and there's no attribution, but it's that facts are the ingredients and evidence is the meal. It's what you do with the facts, what you use them to prove. Because in our cases, everybody has the same facts and they use them to prove different things. But you also want to present evidence because there are some people for whom stories aren't enough. They want something else to rest on. That's the facts, the data, and you using that to support your story. And then the energy of your body is going to be your tone of voice when you tell your story and share your evidence, your body language, your facial expression, your vibe as you do that. And so we build beliefs with stories, evidence, and the energy of our bodies.
And so how do you help people who tend to, my wife would probably accuse me of this, tend to go too far in terms of making it about me being right, as opposed to building the belief in someone else?
You have to figure out, we all do this, right? You're not alone. And some people do it more than others. But you've got to really think to yourself, what is a win here, right? In the courtroom, it's a zero-sum game. One person wins, one person loses. But in negotiations, it can be everyone wins. The definition of win that I like to use in my work is from the Cambridge Dictionary, and it is to receive something positive because you have earned it. Now, your something positive could be a great deal, and you earn it by advocating or negotiating, right? And so when that is your definition of win, it's no longer to take the other person down. It's not to beat the other person. It's to receive something positive, and you earn it by negotiating. I think the other thing that's really important here and would help with your wife's issue with the way that you approach these things, perhaps, is we have to see things from the other person's perspective before we do any of this. I did a TEDx talk on empathy and talking about the importance of cognitive empathy. There's two kinds of empathy, and this is Daniel Goleman's work. He's at Harvard. And cognitive empathy is seeing things from the other person's perspective. Affective or emotional empathy is feeling what they feel. And I think that's how we tend to think about empathy. And I don't like that way because as a lawyer, if I feel, or you, as you know, if you're mediating or negotiating, if you feel the party's anxiety, fear, dread, anger, it's not helpful and it's counterproductive. So you don't need to feel their feelings, but you do need to see the world from their perspective. And if you can see the world through the person's perspective that you're trying to influence and persuade, then you know the best stories to tell them. You know the best evidence to use in support of those stories, and you know the best energy that's going to resonate with them. But if you don't start with seeing things through their perspective, you will fall short on one or all of those three.
So you've kind of outlined how communication is much more than just the words that are being shared. It has to do with, you talked about tone and other things as well. And so talk to us a little bit about when people don't manage those other things, when they're very focused on what the message is and the words that are being used, but their nervousness comes out or their defensiveness comes out. Like, what does that do to undermine their credibility and influence?
Everything. It is your vibe is so much more important than we've ever known. And the research is coming out. There's a phenomenal book that came out in the past year called Why We Click by Kate Murphy. And it's all about our vibes. And we do have them. I'm going to give you a short story because I know you like stories. And this story is true. It's about a horse in the early 1900s in Germany. The horse's name was Hans. And the horse's owner was a math teacher. And he taught Hans how to do math, multiple choice math problems. And it became a big thing in the community there. Everybody, no phones or TV. So this was like a form of entertainment. Everybody's coming to watch Hans do math. And it became such a big thing that the government heard about it and they thought this guy was scamming people. So they sent a committee. The committee said, no, it seems like this horse really does know math. And the psychologist came and he said, let me try something. What if I ask Hans the questions? Maybe the Hans is like, you've got some sort of hint that you're giving him. Hans still got the questions right. The only time he got them wrong was two things had to happen. One of two things. Either the person asking the question didn't know the answer, or the person asking the question was behind a screen of some sort. Hans was reading the vibe, the body language, the micro expressions of the asker. You know, when they would get to the right multiple choice answer, they would lean in a little. Their voice would change a little. The expressions on their face would change a little. And we are all just animals. And so people are reading your vibe when you are asking for what you want, when you are standing in front of a jury, when you are negotiating a raise. They're reading your vibe. And so managing your vibe is where the belief comes in. You've got to, I just prepped someone today for a very difficult conversation, and he was angry. And it's hard to find a belief. You know, I'm not going to get him to believe that the other person is your friend. That's not going to happen. But what he could get to the belief of is that this is going to be interesting. The other belief that was really helpful to him is I am safe. You know, if you just can get to the belief I am safe, it can reduce some of that fight, flight, freeze, and fawn and calm things down. So that overall vibe that you think, well, let me get past that and work on what I say and standing up straight and power posing, it's not going to be effective if you're still thinking, I hate this person, I hate this process, this is terrible.
So let's go down that road a little bit, because I think that's an important thing for people, whether you're in the litigation context that's very adversarial, or even in the business context, this is very true. And that is, people are trying to throw you off your game. You've got people that are literally, they're trying to get you in a place to where you're uncomfortable, where you make bad decisions, where you lose, your composure. And so what are some really practical ideas that people can do when they know they're going into an environment where there's going to be people that are trying to throw them off their game? How do they remain steadfast in terms of who they are and what they're trying to accomplish?
Okay, so I'm going to give you two different parts to this answer. The first thing is, when you are in those situations where you feel like you're threatened, and those difficult conversations are often that, when someone's trying to, witnesses feel like prey, they're being attacked.
Yeah.
So when you're in that situation, it is natural. We talk a lot in the world about fight and flight, but there's also freeze and fawn. It's natural to fight with the person who's questioning you, Flight is harder in the litigation. You can't really leave, but in the world
Yeah.
outside, you can walk out of the meeting. Freeze is sort of just to like dissociate, and fawn is to submit and give in. The reason I want to point those out is when you know what you do, when you start to recognize, oh, when I feel like I know myself personally in professional situations in the courtroom, I was a fighter. In personal situations, I'm more of a fawner. Okay. You win. I don't want to fight. When you know what you are, you can recognize what you're doing. And that's helpful because otherwise it can happen unconsciously. So the first thing is to get to know yourself enough to know, do I fight? Do I flee? Do I freeze? Do I fawn? And know yourself. In different situations, it might be different. And then what I teach is the 3 B's to counter that: belief work, body work, and breath work. If you're going into one of these conversations that's going to be adversarial, the breath work is, and we could talk about this for a whole podcast because people have courses on breath work. But the thing that I teach my people is that a longer out breath is good for the parasympathetic nervous system. So when you were little, my mom used to always say, just take a deep breath. It's really give a deep breath that calms you down. The inhale activates your nervous system, which sometimes you want that. The exhale deactivates your nervous system. So you might want to, before you go into those conversations, breathe in for a count of 4 and out for a count of 6. That little bit can be helpful. And there's all kinds of breath work you can do to calm yourself so that you don't resort to those 4 F's. And then there's body work. And this gets a little more woo-woo, but it works for me and it works for a lot of my clients. There's an ancient Japanese art of acupressure, John, called Jinshin, Jinshin.
Okay.
It's actually Jinshin Jitsu, but Jinshin is what you would find it as. And they have different areas of the body correlate to different emotions. And I learned this at a retreat I went on in Arizona, and I've used it ever since. And it's the thumbs are anxiety centers. This made sense to me because I sucked my thumb when I was little. So also this was made sense to me. If you grab your thumb with either hand and you just wrap your hand around your thumb and apply a little bit of pressure and sort of, you've got to be aware of it. You can't just be giving your thumb a death grip, and use it as a moment maybe to take that long out breath. Applying that pressure to your thumb can calm your nervous system enough that you don't resort to those 4 F's. So the thumbs, the body work, there's other things you can do, but that seems to be really helpful. It helps me when I used to do television a lot in the makeup chair. I'd always be grabbing my thumbs just to sort of calm me down before I step in front of the red light. So that's body work. And then belief work is what we've already talked about. If I'm getting all revved up, what am I believing? If I feel myself starting to fawn, that's the time to say to myself, Heather, what are you believing right now? And what could you believe instead that's going to calm this response and make you a better negotiator, advocate, presenter, whatever the case may be?
So talk a little bit about that. You've mentioned that a couple of times, this whole belief thing. How do you transfer your beliefs? Is it more than just telling your mind okay, I'm going to believe this now? I mean, your mind kind of sets the belief in and it's kind of locked in. How do you truly transfer what you believe?
Yeah, it takes time, but it's the same way you do with someone outside of yourself, right? You tell yourself a different story. You give yourself different evidence. So I'll give you an example from my own life. When I was younger, I wanted to do a marathon. I had no reason to believe I could do a marathon. I didn't believe I could do a marathon. I had a pretty strong belief that I was not athletic and I couldn't run a marathon. I wasn't a runner. But I told myself the story, you could run a marathon. I didn't say you can, didn't say you will, you could. I started to tell myself the story. How cool would it be? How great would it be to tell the story that you had run a marathon? I did it through Team Leukemia. I started to explore that. But then I needed evidence. And this is why evidence is so important, because if you can tell yourself stories, you're on to yourself. You know when a story is just a story. And so I had to collect and create evidence to support that idea, that story that I could run a marathon. Now, collecting evidence, John, is looking around you. So at the time, I was probably 30 years old. I could go online and say, do 30-year-old women who've never run marathons, and see examples of some women who have done that. That's collecting evidence. And that can build my belief, support the belief in that story. Evidence that you collect isn't as, I call it weighty, isn't as strong as the evidence that you create. So I started running and I ran 2 miles. And now I had evidence that I could run 2 miles. And then the next week I ran 4 miles and I was creating evidence that I was a runner. And then as the more I ran, the more I had more evidence that this was actually possible for me. And eventually I ran a marathon. It doesn't happen quickly. We don't often shift beliefs like this for ourselves or others. In the courtroom, most cases aren't tried in a day. You need time to tell your story and then bring in the evidence for the jury. And the same is true for your own beliefs. But you have to be open to the possibility of a different story. And then you have to collect and create evidence to support that new story and do your best to stay in a positive energy as you do it.
That's fantastic. So I want to be sure to save some time to talk about your book, The Elegant Warrior. And in this book, you present this framework that I thought had tremendous application to negotiation. And it was kind of the 3 C's. So talk about those and talk about how it applies to negotiation in your view.
It's everything to me. I talk about, it's funny because your work changes, but the 3 C's are the basics of what I talk about. They are compassion, credibility, and charisma. So compassion is that cognitive empathy, John. It's before you start, you have to see things from other people's perspectives. You have to see things from your opponents. And I'm putting that in quotes because if you think of someone as the enemy, it changes your energy. But you have to see things from their perspective. In the courtroom, one of my superpowers was seeing things from the jury's perspective. It helps you to overcome the curse of knowledge. It helps you to tell stories and share evidence that resonate with them. So compassion is seeing things from the other people's perspectives. So important for negotiation. And then credibility is the next thing. I often say, if they don't believe you, you can't win. And so I have in my work a belief triangle because a lot of times people think credibility is all about your credentials. And that's part of the belief triangle. That's where they believe in you. That's your expertise, your CV, your resume, your training, your education, and so forth. That's part of it. Another part is people have to believe you. When you make a promise, you keep it. When you set an expectation, you meet it. And in negotiation, if they can't believe you, you're in big trouble because no one's going to agree to your terms if they don't believe you're going to stick by them. But the foundation of the belief triangle is the part that many people forget, and it's the most important part. And it's that they have to believe that you can help them. That what you have to give, in a negotiation is often a give and take. What you have to give is something that they want. And that sort of brings us back to the compassion, right? You can't make them believe that you can help them if you don't know what their pain is, if you don't know what their problems are. And so that credibility is that belief triangle. They have to believe you, they have to believe in you, and they have to believe that you can help them. And then we go to the charisma. And the charisma isn't my work. I read a Harvard Business Review article by Dr. John Antonakis about the 12, he calls them the 12 charismatic leadership tactics. I then had him on my podcast, The Elegant Warrior, and ever since have been obsessed because he has very rigorous research around these. I'm from the courtroom where the research has to be real. It can't be fluffy research. And his research is very rigorous. And so I teach these 12 charismatic leadership tactics. We can go through them if you want to. Part of them are what we've already talked about. The tone of voice, body language, and facial expressions are what I call the 3 hows of these charismatic leadership tactics. But if you combine compassion, credibility, and charisma, you are going to be so much more likely to get what you want.
So let's go ahead. We can do it quickly. Yeah, let's run through the other charismatic characteristics there.
Yeah, let me see if I can remember them without resorting to my thing. So the way I remember them is there's 5 whats, 4 whys, and 3 hows. That adds up to 12. Yes. Okay. The 5 whats, you'll like this because stories are very charismatic. When you teach people in stories, when you communicate in stories, it's very charismatic. And the way he defines charisma is compelling people to act. He studies a lot of politicians. He does a lot of research on how do you make people do things. So stories are one. Metaphors are another. Metaphors is an underused way to be charismatic. We don't always have time to tell stories, but we talk in metaphors all day long. And if you can start to recognize metaphors and use them, analogies also, another very strong one. Contrasts are another. When they go low, we go high. Michelle Obama, that's an example of contrast. Lists of three. Lists of three are very good. The human brain loves threes. Yeah. Easy to remember. The last one's rhetorical questions. That gets a little bit more complicated. We use them a lot in the courtroom, though. Rhetorical questions are one of the five. So those are the 5 whats. Now, the 4 whys are a little bit more fluffy. This is where you have to have shared ethics with the people that you're talking to. So they need to know that you feel what they feel. You have to have moral conviction. You have to set a lofty goal. And my favorite of these, you have to communicate confidence that they can reach that goal. So your mediator did some of these, right? They came into the room and set a lofty goal. We can come to a conclusion here. We're going to come to an agreement. And communicated confidence that was going to happen. Like you said, he kept saying, like, hey, it's going to be great. We're going to come to an agreement. That's very charismatic. In the courtroom, I used to set a lofty goal for the jury. This case is going to be hard. I would try to hit these 4. I know that we all feel badly for this injured patient. I know that we all share the value, though, of justice, which is what we're here for. It is a really hard thing to overcome your own sympathy and really just search for justice here, set a lofty goal. But I know this group that we chose as our jury, you can do that. And I really believed it. So it came across in my tone, my energy, and my facial expressions. And that's where those 12 charismatic tactics are all hit.
That's great. That is great. Okay, so here's what I want to do as we kind of wrap this thing up is I want to kind of do the little game of, okay, if you really want to start taking a step in this direction, obviously you've given us a lot more resources to go and to look at and to pay attention to and to study, but to just try to be super practical with people in terms of what do they need to start doing? What do they need to stop doing in terms of just opening the door to some of this? So let's start with a couple of things that people need to start doing. So, what is something they need to start doing to kind of rephrase or reframe a negotiation as they kind of move into it? If it's really difficult, if it's really tough, if people are very skeptical and very hostile towards each other.
You've got to try to find a way that you can believe something different. One of my favorite things is curiosity. Instead of aggression, if you can get to curiosity, and then what thought makes you curious? I wonder what's going to happen in this negotiation. I wonder what skill I'll learn about negotiating in this negotiation. I wonder what they're going to say in response to this. If you can get curious, it's a reframe that reframes your energy, which reframes your action, which reframes your result.
Okay. So I'm going to answer this question, and then I'll let you answer it. But kind of the next question is really thinking about what is a question that people should start using in negotiation more often? And for me, that answer is what if? As we start thinking about solutions, just what if we did this with not any commitment to it, but just like what if? But I'm curious from your perspective, like what would your question be that you encourage people to use more often?
It's funny because there's a couple that come to my head, but I think the one that most applies in this situation is what am I missing? What am I missing? Because the other side, they have a perspective too. And if you understand their perspective, you might be able to come to a very easy conclusion. I'm sure you've heard this story, John, about the mediator who is going back and forth. These people are fighting over an orange. And all day long, the mediator is trying to get them to come to the conclusion. And it turns out one person wanted the juice for their health bar and the other wanted the rind for a cocktail. The mediator was missing something, right? And if they had known that, the day would have been ended and everybody could have gone off and made their juices and had their drinks. But what am I missing allows you to start seeing what else would be the next step of that so that you can start to see the other person's perspective.
Yeah, that's great. All right, let's do a couple of stop. So what do people need to stop doing as far as making sure that they maintain kind of the vibe that they want to maintain? Like what is the number one thing that people do to kill that?
I think the number one thing is to see the other side as the enemy. And you see the person you're negotiating with or the person that you're negotiating against or in the courtroom, even the opposing attorney. If I'm preparing a witness, I encourage them not to see opposing counsel as the enemy. This takes some time. It's not an immediate agreement. But if you're, we've talked about this before, John, but if you're thinking of yourself as the guide here and the jury is the hero in this scenario, then the enemy isn't the opposing attorney. The enemy is confusion. And the same in a negotiation. The enemy isn't the other person. The enemy is confusion. I often say, this sounds a little arrogant, but if I'm not getting what I want, they're just confused. And so if I can slay confusion, I can get what I want. And so to stop seeing the other side as the enemy and start seeing confusion as the enemy, you're going to do a whole lot better.
Okay. And then lastly, what's a phrase or some language that people should stop using? One of the things that I tell people, and I'm guilty of this a lot, is just the starting sentences with "I think." Folks, they don't care what you think. And especially if you're on the other side, then they're like, great, I'm glad you think that, but here's the reality. So give me something that you find that is not productive in terms of things people constantly say.
Well, I'm going to turn this around a little and say that saying anything. I think another book by that same author, Kate Murphy, is You're Not Listening. And if you read You're Not Listening, it is guaranteed to make you a better negotiator. It's a better book than Why We Click, in my opinion. It's all about how listening is charismatic. Listening is persuasive. Listening is powerful. When you are a good listener, you make the people around you better speakers. And when you're a good listener, you know this from your work in this, you are a better negotiator. You are so much more likely to figure out what is actually going on with the other person. And so I would say stop saying anything until you've really listened to where the other side is coming from, what's important to them, what their problem is, and then you'll know the right thing to say and what not to say.
Okay, last thing as we kind of wrap this all up, as you think about negotiation kind of in general, and as you think about everything you've taught us in terms of thinking about mindset and belief and all of this, like what would be your characterization of what people are trying to do in a negotiation together? Is there an illustration, a story, a characterization that just helps people say that this is the approach that Heather's taught me?
Yeah, I think that it goes back to that definition of win. It's to receive something positive because you have earned it. Ideally, there's something positive for both of us in these situations. And we earn it by listening, by using those 3 C's, and by working with each other to figure out if everyone can win. Most of the time they can. And if you reframe it in your own head, even when you lose, you can win, right? Even if in every negotiation, people say everyone walks away not happy, right? That's a good negotiation. That's the saying. But you still could have a win because you've learned a little bit more about the other person. You've learned a little bit more about whether you fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. There's always a win available if you define it that way, to receive something positive because you have earned it.
Lots of great stuff here, Heather. We're definitely going to have you back and spend some more time talking about this. I feel like we just kind of scratched the surface, but lots of good stuff for people to really benefit from and to grow in terms of who they are as communicators and then also as negotiators. So thanks for your time and stopping by the Negotiation Made Simple podcast.
My pleasure. I love talking to you. I feel like I could talk to you all day. So my pleasure.
This is one of those episodes that is so full of ideas and so full of great content that you literally don't know what to pick in terms of emphasizing and highlighting. But I think the thing that Heather said that really got my attention was the importance of your vibe and how your vibe goes a long way, sometimes a lot farther than what you say or the presentation that you make. But your vibe is what people pick up on. And your vibe is what determines whether they will trust you or not, whether you have credibility, whether you have charisma. And so I appreciate Heather reminding us that there are some things that we can do, and they're in those kind of 12 ideas of charisma that she shared that will help us manage our vibe so that it can be consistent with the message that we are delivering, and we can be as impactful as we can possibly be as negotiators. Thank you for listening to the Negotiation Made Simple podcast, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode.